Hey guys, tonight we journey into a world you think you know, but trust me, you don't. The Victorian era, it's often painted as polished, refined and drenched in decorum. A time of gas lamps, crinolines and afternoon teas. But beneath the surface of elegance lay a dining table bound not by taste, but by rules. So many rules. So many, in fact, that eating dinner became less a meal and more a test of social survival. One wrong move, and you weren't just rude, you were scandalous. So before we step into the parlor of the past, go ahead and like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these strange little trips through uncomfortable history. And I'd love to know, what time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching from? The comment section is like a little time zone map for this sleepy community. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft hum in the background. Let your eyes grow heavy, and let's slip gently into tonight's strange, absurd, and spoon-restricted journey. Tonight's journey. The bizarre dining rules that controlled Victorian tables. Forget everything you know about dinner parties. This isn't your grandma's good china and polite conversation over casserole. This is a world where the way you held your fork could define your entire social status, where using the wrong spoon could doom your marriage prospects, and where dropping a napkin might actually be the most dramatic thing to happen all week. You are about to enter a Victorian dining room, but not as a guest of honor. No, tonight. You are just a regular person, perhaps middle class, perhaps a little above or below. You've been invited to dinner, which sounds lovely, until you realize you don't know the proper way to sit down, or which of the 14 forks you're supposed to use, or how many bites you're allowed to take before someone starts whispering behind their hand fan. This isn't Downton Abbey. This is etiquette boot camp disguised in lace. Victorian society was obsessed with appearances, not just what you wore or said, but how you sipped your soup, how you passed the salt, and whether you dared to ask for seconds. There were entire books, thick ones, written just to teach people how not to embarrass themselves while trying to eat a baked potato. And don't worry, we'll get to the baked potatoes, because those had rules too. Over the next couple hours, we'll wander through a world where social anxiety was practically plated and served at 7 sharp. We'll explore the unwritten and very, very written laws that controlled every bite, every sip, and every glance across the dinner table. There were no casual dinners, only performances. So settle in, because tonight, you're not just falling asleep. You're being seated at a table surrounded by velvet, judgment, and more cutlery than you've ever seen in your life. Welcome to the Victorian table. You open your eyes to the faint glow of filtered sunlight, pale and slightly sickly pressing through a set of heavy velvet curtains. The room is cold, not freezing, but uncomfortable in that stubborn Victorian way, as though warmth were a sin only permitted to the wealthy or the dead. Your bed is high, too high. You're not on a mattress. You're perched atop a towering feather-stuffed monument to posture and discomfort. The blankets are stiff, heavy, woven wool, perhaps, or horsehair, judging by the texture. They smell faintly of dust, starch, and something old. Not old like antiques, but old like people who never left. The air is dry and thick with coal soot. Somewhere nearby, a fire struggles in the grate, more decorative than functional. It crackles faintly, trying not to be noticed. You sit up slowly, feeling the bed springs creak beneath you like disapproving in-laws. Your nightshirt is long and made of something scratchy linen, maybe. You want to swing your legs over the side of the bed, but pause. There's no carpet. No rug, just cold wooden floors, waxed to a glossy finish that dares you to slip and break something scandalous. There are slippers nearby, but they're not yours. Someone left them for you or expected you to bring your own. It's not clear. You hesitate, and in that hesitation, you feel the room watching you. Not literally, but in that peculiar Victorian way. The wallpaper is too floral, the mirror too wide, the portrait on the wall too disapproving for a painting of a woman who never smiles. There's a dressing screen in the corner. Behind it, a washstand with a porcelain bowl and jug. The water is cold, of course. The concept of hot running water is still decades away for most homes, and even those that claim to have it only deliver lukewarm dribbles with the consistency of weak tea. You splash your face with the ice water and feel your skin tense in protest. It smells faintly of lye soap, medicinal and unforgiving. The window, if you could see through it, would show a street lined with iron fences, soot-covered brick, and carriages trundling past like arthritic beetles. But the curtains don't open easily. They're heavy enough to require a servant. But there is no servant. Not for you. This isn't your house. You've been placed here a guest, a relative, a social obligation. Maybe you're here to marry someone. Maybe you're here to impress. Or worse, maybe you're just here to be quietly judged over roast lamb and aspic. The hallway outside your door is narrow and dim. Wallpaper clings to the walls like a rash dark greens, gold patterns, a floral motif that seems deeply ashamed of itself. Gas lamps flicker, casting dancing shadows that make every corner look like it might contain a maid you forgot to tip or a governess silently correcting your posture. You hear footsteps, soft, polite, fast. Someone walking as if they're late for nothing and everything at once. It's morning in the Victorian world, and you're behind schedule. Your first mistake. You didn't ring the bell pull. Every bedroom has one. A small cord near the bed, attached to a system of twisted wires and downstairs bells that let the staff know you are alive and require help putting on your socks. You didn't pull it, which means your tea, the morning tea, that is supposed to arrive on a small silver tray with cream, sugar, and judgment is late. You open the door and immediately regret it. The hallway is cold, and someone has polished the floor with a substance that might as well be ice. You shuffle toward the washroom, not a bathroom. The tub is not in the room. The toilet is not in the room. The Victorian washroom is merely a place to splash your face and brush your teeth with baking soda and regret. There is no privacy, the walls are thin, and the plumbing, if present at all, is loud and resentful. Somewhere below, a servant coughs politely. You are not supposed to be awake yet. Or perhaps you are late. The Victorian schedule is deliberately mysterious unless you're born into it. Outside the window, a milkman shuffles past. A delivery boy on a bicycle nearly runs into a woman with a parasol. Horses clatter on cobblestones. The street is busy but hushed, like a parade marching in whispered disapproval. You are expected to be downstairs by breakfast, but you don't know what time that is. You don't know where the dining room is. You don't know how to address the cook. Or if you're even allowed to. You wonder if it would be rude to wander into the kitchen and ask for toast, and immediately you feel the ghost of Queen Victoria slap that thought out of your brain with a gloved hand. There are rules. You don't know them yet, but you will. You will learn them with the sharp edge of a butter knife and the humiliating clang of a dropped spoon. Downstairs, silverware is already being polished. Napkins are being folded into shapes that resemble swans or shame depending on the household. The table is being set, and not just with plates. There are layers, underplates, soup plates, fish knives, bread forks, glasses for water, glasses for wine, glasses for something else that you can't identify but are not allowed to drink before 1 p.m. And at the head of the table, a seat for the host, the patriarch, or matriarch, or most terrifyingly, the aunt whose job is not to eat, but to judge everyone else as they attempt to. You are about to be fed, but not comforted. In this house, meals are a ceremony, a test, a performance, and you are already failing. You shuffle quietly down the stairs, doing your best impression of someone who knows what they're doing. The banister is polished to a mirror shine. Each step creaks with the careful elegance of old wood and older expectations. You feel like even the staircase is judging your posture. The house is hushed. Not silent, Victorian homes are never truly quiet, but filled with the background murmur of human activity layered beneath civility. Footsteps on tile, a coal scuttle being dragged across the hearth, the low whistle of a kettle that no one dares let boil too long. Somewhere in the distance, a grandfather clock ticks, like it's winding down toward your public humiliation. You reach the breakfast room, a concept that promises comfort but rarely delivers. There's a long table covered in a white linen cloth, so crisp you worry it might cut you. Along the table are silver place settings, bone china teacups, and enough spoons to start a small orchestra. There is no buffet, no piles of pancakes or platters of bacon. Everything is arranged with careful minimalism, which is Victorian for oppressive austerity disguised as elegance. The food is there, technically, just carefully separated, shrouded under dome-shaped covers, and guarded by the unspoken understanding that you are to take only what is proper. And what is proper depends entirely on who you are. If you're a guest of high enough status, someone perhaps a footman or a quietly miserable maid may ask what you'd like. Toast? Eggs? Kippers? A soft-boiled egg that looks like it was raised under a microscope? If you're not important enough for conversation, then you're expected to follow the cues. Wait for the host to sit. Wait for the head of the household, typically a grim-looking man with a starched collar and a handlebar moustache, to lift his fork. Wait until the toast is passed, but never reach across the table. That's an unforgivable breach. If someone else wants the same thing you do, you must wait for the dish to make its full social orbit. And God help you if you butter your bread the wrong way. You don't slather. You don't tear. No. You break off one bite-sized piece at a time, place it gently on your side plate, and butter only that piece with the butter knife provided, never your own. Breakfast itself is a strange affair. The menu varies depending on class, but for a well-off Victorian household, the options are both luxurious and underwhelming at the same time. There's porridge, of course bland, grey, and presented with the sort of reverence typically reserved for holy relics. Eggs, prepared softly but never scrambled, because scrambled eggs are undignified. Toast, pale and dry, and served in a silver rack that ensures it's stone cold by the time it reaches your plate, because warm toast is considered vulgar. There may be kidneys. There may be kedgeree, a baffling Anglo-Indian rice dish with fish and eggs that somehow made its way into the breakfast canon despite its complete disregard for digestion. And then there's tea. Not just any tea. Strong, black, and served in delicate porcelain that looks like it might shatter if you breathe too hard. Milk goes in after the tea unless you're middle class, in which case you've just committed a grave social error by doing it the other way around. Sugar is added with dainty silver tongs, and under no circumstances should you stir noisily. A spoon that clinks is a reputation that sinks. Coffee is sometimes offered, but it's considered vaguely foreign, slightly suspect, and usually badly brewed. You drink it anyway, because it's 1,867. And you're trying to stay awake while counting the tines on your third fork. If you're a child or considered too delicate for heavy food, you may be served a boiled egg in an ornate silver egg cup, complete with a tiny spoon and a lesson in humiliation. The goal is to crack the top cleanly, remove it with grace, and eat the inside without slurping. You will fail at least one of these steps. Everyone does. That's the point. If you're poor, and let's not forget that most Victorians were, your breakfast is simpler, harsher, and entirely devoid of etiquette. A crust of bread, a smear of dripping, maybe a weak cup of tea, brewed from leaves used 3 times already. You eat standing, in a dark kitchen, or in the street if you're a child, sent out to run errands. No napkin, no toast rack, just your hands, your hunger, and the quiet reminder that breakfast is not about pleasure. It's about surviving long enough to reach supper. Now, hygiene. The thing no one wants to mention but everyone is quietly obsessed with. The Victorian idea of cleanliness was deeply tied to morality. To be clean was to be good, but also plumbing was limited. And soap? Soap was harsh, often homemade, and smelled like carbolic acid and judgment. In the morning, you wash at the basin. There is no shower, no warm mist, no rainforest setting. You fill a jug with cold water unless a servant has done it for you, and pour it into the porcelain bowl. Then you scrub your face with a flannel, wipe your ears, clean under your fingernails, and do your best to tame your hair into something that doesn't imply madness or political rebellion. Teeth are brushed with baking soda or salt rubbed onto a cloth. Toothpaste does exist in a primitive form, usually in a tin, but it tastes like someone weaponized chalk and regret. Toothbrushes have boar bristle heads and wooden handles that splinter when you're least expecting it. You don't smile much after using them. You mostly wince. Men shave using straight razors that threaten to turn every morning into a murder investigation. Women, of course, are not supposed to grow hair in the first place, and certainly never acknowledge that they do. If you're bleeding, you pretend you're not. If you're sweating, you dab at your forehead with a lace handkerchief and whisper a prayer to Queen Victoria. Baths happen maybe once a week, sometimes less. There's a tub in the house maybe, but it's hauled out, filled by hand, and shared first by father, then sons, then mother, then daughters. By the end, it's more soup than water. So instead of bathing, you freshen up. A dab of rose water, a spritz of lavender. If you're lower class, maybe a lemon peel rubbed under your arms. If you're truly desperate, vinegar. Deodorant hasn't been invented yet, but expectations have. You're supposed to smell like nothing, not clean, not perfumed, just like air with a corset. Failure to achieve this odorless perfection is considered poor breeding, which is ironic, considering you haven't actually been allowed to sweat since the last social season. And now, you're dressed. You're cleanish. You've eaten something soft and tasteless while trying not to offend the marmalade hierarchy. But the day has only just begun. And before dinner comes lunch. And before lunch comes survival. You're standing in front of the wardrobe. Or perhaps it's standing in front of you like some mahogany beast, judging your taste in collars and silently daring you to choose incorrectly. Victorian clothing isn't just something you wear. It's a declaration of who you are, where you stand, who you're trying to impress, and which parts of your body should be restrained for the comfort of others. It's not about style, not really. It's about etiquette made visible. Fabric as morality. Thread counts as social cues. Let's begin with what you are expected to wear. First, undergarments. Multiple. For women, this includes a chemise, the base layer meant to protect outer clothing from the filth of your skin, or perhaps the other way around. Then drawers open-crotched for convenience, modesty, and a sense of ever-present vulnerability. Over that, a corset, boned with steel or whalebone, laced tightly at the back. Not to flatten, but to shape, to cinch, to gently punish the organs until you resemble a fashionable hourglass filled with regret. Over that comes a corset cover. Then a crinoline or hoop skirt a cage, essentially. a wearable bird trap that turns doorways into obstacles and sitting into a negotiation. Then at least one petticoat, sometimes two. Only after all of that does your actual dress go on. And it's never just one piece. There's a bodice, a skirt, a belt, a collar which might be detachable, cuffs which also might be detachable, buttons, hooks, eyes, possibly jet beading or a modest bustle. And everything must be perfectly aligned. Wrinkles are treason. And mismatched accessories, an invitation to social ruin. Dressing is not a solo event. You require help, a maid, a sister, a cousin, pressed into service. It takes time and effort and deep breathing between corset tugs. And still, after all that, your dress is not meant to be comfortable. It's meant to signify you are modest, you are respectable, you are not sweating, even though you're wearing 14 layers and the windows are sealed with lead paint. Men do not have it much better. A typical Victorian gentleman begins with drawers and a long white undershirt, which he will tuck in with the quiet shame of a man who understands buttons will be involved. Then trousers, not pants, never pants. The word pants is undignified. Trousers are what you wear if you expect to be taken seriously by anyone above the butcher. Then a waistcoat, usually wool, buttoned all the way up to the neck, regardless of weather or reason. Over that, a high-collared shirt, starched until it could wound. Then a cravat or necktie, which must be tied just so with enough flourish to imply you've been educated, but not so much that you look French. Then the coat, tailored, naturally. If it has tails, you're formal. If it's frocked, you're fashionable. If it's brown, you're probably not invited to dinner. Accessories include a pocket watch, even if you're not punctual, gloves, especially if you're not clean, and a top hat that is never ever to be worn indoors, not even by accident, especially not in front of a lady. That sort of faux pas can follow you to your grave and possibly into the afterlife, where even ghosts are deeply invested in etiquette. And now that you're fully dressed, let's talk shelter. Because the Victorian house is not a home in the modern sense. It's a machine, a carefully coded structure designed to maintain appearances, separate the classes, and confuse anyone who accidentally wanders into the wrong room. Even in modest homes, the layout is complex. Parlor, drawing room, morning room, dining room, breakfast room, library. Even if you only own 3 books, each room has a purpose, and that purpose is rarely comfort. It is ritual. Let's start with the drawing room. This is where you go to pretend you're not cold. It's where you entertain guests, but only certain guests, and only between certain hours, and only with the appropriate number of teaspoons. It contains furniture that is never to be used, chairs no one is allowed to sit on, and a piano that someone's daughter is supposed to practice but doesn't. Then the dining room, a battlefield in disguise. It's long, narrow, and lined with dark wood furniture. The chairs are tall, the chandelier is low, and everything smells faintly of polish and roast beef memories. The table is set always, even when there's no meal. The presence of matching china is more important than food itself. This is the room where social performance reaches its peak, and your margin for error is razor thin. Next, the kitchen. But don't go there. Not unless you live here. The kitchen is below stairs, physically and socially. It is filled with heat, knives, shouting, and a cook who will bite your hand off if you so much as touch the bread bin. Above stairs, bedrooms each with their own names, depending on their location and function. There's the blue room, the back bedroom, the guest room, the night nursery, the day nursery, and the servant's attic. Every space has a label. Every occupant has a rank. Even the wallpaper is trying to outrank you. And don't forget the water closet, that tiny mysterious space where hygiene meets architecture in a dark, awkward handshake. Toilets are still evolving. Plumbing is unreliable. Some homes still rely on chamber pot. Yes, chamber pots. Elegant porcelain bowls you relieve yourself into and then hand to someone else. Outside, the facade of the house is crucial. Brickwork must be clean. Windows must be spotless. Gardens must be pruned to the standards of a sentient topiary. If your ivy climbs too far, it implies laziness. If your roses bloom too early, it suggests immodesty. And inside, dust is your enemy. Drafts are scandalous. And heaven help you if your coal scuttle is empty. Even the air in a Victorian home is curated. Not fresh, no, never fresh, but controlled, filtered through lace curtains, weighed down with gaslight fumes, and perfumed with lavender sachets tucked into every drawer. If you smell something, you're meant to pretend you didn't. The home is a stage. Every room a scene, every chair, mirror, and candlestick placed with intention. There is no chaos, no comfort, only presentation. Your clothes are armor. Your house is camouflage. And you are merely a silhouette gliding through it all, trying not to trip over a footstool or mispronounce bouillon in front of the second cousins. But the day is still young. You haven't even worked yet. You haven't cleaned the silver, or practiced your posture, or suffered through a luncheon served with 7 spoons and only one topic of conversation. That's coming next. You're dressed half-fed and fully anxious. Somewhere behind you, the breakfast dishes are being cleared, but not by you. That would be improper, unless of course you are a servant, in which case you've been clearing dishes since dawn, and no one will thank you for it. Because in Victorian society, daily labour is invisible if it's honest, and unbearable if it's decorative. Let's start with you. Not as a lady or a gentleman, but as someone in between. Perhaps middle class, respectable, educated enough to read, but not rich enough to retire. You don't work with your hands, not unless it's embroidery or writing carefully worded rejection letters. You work with your status. You perform productivity. It's exhausting. If you're a man in this sliver of the social ladder, you have 2 choices. You are either a gentleman of business or a gentleman pretending he doesn't need business. The former means you rise early, though not too early, lest you seem desperate and take a carriage or walk to your office, which is probably in the city. You wear a hat, of course. You never leave the house without one. Hats are, to Victorians, what shoes are to dreams, essential, symbolic, and occasionally crushing. You arrive at your place of employment, perhaps a bank, a solicitor's office, or a shipping company you don't fully understand. You sit at a desk. You write letters. You nod seriously. Occasionally, you sip tea while thinking about investments. Everything is quiet. Everything is slow. Progress is measured in the thickness of correspondence and the sharpness of your pen nib. You must be calm, respectable, and wear a cravat that says modest income, but not utter failure. Quote, if you're lucky, your job involves sitting. If not, you may be in trade a shopkeeper, a clerk, a tailor's assistant. You deal with customers. You measure. You bend. You carry. And all the while, you pretend this isn't labor, not real labor. Because real labor is something you pay other people to do and never discuss at dinner. Now, if you're a woman, your job is everything, but none of it counts. You wake early before the men, of course. If you're a lady of the house, you supervise, which is a delicate way of saying you organize everyone else's labor while being expected to glow gently and never sweat. You plan meals. You instruct servants. You approve fabric swatches for curtains no one is allowed to touch. You write letters, so many letters to cousins you've never liked, and ladies' societies you don't believe in. You must remain socially engaged while physically exhausted. If you have children, your job doubles. You're a moral compass, a nurse, a tutor, and a professional scarer of governesses. You're expected to raise perfectly obedient offspring while never actually raising your voice. And of course, you must look presentable through all of this. Hair curled, dress changed before dinner, manners intact even when the cook quits mid-pudding, and the dog vomits in the drawing room. If you're poor, and let's be honest, most Victorians are, your day is not curated. It is endured. You rise in a room with no carpet, and one window that hasn't opened since the Queen's coronation. Your bed is shared with siblings, with your grandmother, with the occasional mouse. The air smells like cabbage, coal, and effort. You wash with cold water from a chipped jug, eat a crust of bread if there is one, and go to work. If you are a maid, you start before sunrise. You stoke fires. You empty chamber pots. You scrub floors that people pretend are always spotless. You wash linens that weigh more than you do when wet. You are supposed to be silent unless spoken to, cheerful without question, and invisible unless carrying something. If you're a scullery maid, your life is even lower than the stairs you sleep beneath. You clean pots. You peel vegetables until your hands cramp. You scrape grease off ovens that refuse to come clean, no matter how hard you pray. And you are paid in pennies. Literally. If you're a footman, you polish silver. You open doors. You stand still behind chairs and nod at nothing. You wear livery velvet, braiding, buttons, not because it suits you, but because it reminds guests that you are owned decoratively. If you're a butler, you run the house. You control the wine, the schedule, the mood. You are the silent engine behind every dinner, the moderator of social tension, the final arbiter of how hot the soup is allowed to be. You know everything. You are thanked for none of it. And outside the house, the real labor continues. Coal miners dig endlessly, lungs filling with dust they'll never cough out. Chimney sweeps often children wedge their tiny bodies into narrow flues and hope they're not forgotten. Carpenters, blacksmiths, dock workers, tanners, all labor in sweat and noise, building a world they'll never be invited to dine in. Their hands are blistered, their backs bent, their clothing coarse and patched. They don't know the difference between a fish fork and a dessert fork, and no one expects them to. But they're the ones building the tables that others will dine at. And then there are the factory workers, men, women, and children, jammed into textile mills, matchstick factories, and workhouses. The hours are endless. The air is thick with lint, smoke, and danger. Fingers are lost. Eyes go blind. Lungs collapse. And the pay might get you half a loaf and a place on the floor near the stove if you're lucky. Still, they keep going, because stopping means hunger, and hunger is louder than manners. Meanwhile, in parlours across the city, others are busy being idle. These are the leisure classes. Their labour is social, appearing at the right balls, writing the right notes, hosting the right teas, looking appropriately bored while secretly calculating whose marriage is falling apart. They practice piano not for performance, but to prove they can. They embroider pillowcases not for need, but for display. They read poetry aloud with the same intensity most people reserve for revolutions. And even for them, leisure is work. The corset still pinches, the cravat still itches. The social performance must go on, always polished, always poised, always ready to judge someone for using the wrong spoon during the fish course, because in the Victorian world, labour never really ends. It just changes costume, whether you're hauling coal or arranging lilies, whether you're standing in a factory or at the head of a dinner table trying to remember if you salt the soup before or after tasting it, your day is full of effort. Just never acknowledge that. The real rule of Victorian life: don't show the strain. You may be starving, exhausted, grieving, or falling apart at the seams, but as long as your cuffs are starched and your napkin is folded just so, you're doing it right. Now, the bell is ringing. Not for lunch, that would be too easy. It's time for religious reflection, superstition, and a little holy fear. You're halfway through the day, and already the weight of expectation clings to you like damp wool. You've eaten, dressed, supervised, scrubbed, or sat in perfect posture depending on your station in life. But now, the clock strikes a quieter note, a more internal kind of pressure, the one that doesn't come from social critics, but from God. Because in the Victorian world, the dinner table may have been about etiquette, but morality was the real menu. Religion isn't a quiet background presence here. It's not a matter of private faith or personal choice. It's woven into the curtains. It's carved into the side of the fireplace. It's printed in the daily newspaper and mumbled under your breath as you pass a church. God is everywhere, and He's watching you eat. Victorians didn't just fear sin, they categorized it, codified it, and carried it around like spiritual luggage. There was a rule for everything: a verse, a sermon, a cautionary tale about a man who failed to bless his soup and was subsequently run over by a hansom cab. You begin your day with prayer, whether you believe or not. If you're a child, you are taught to kneel at your bed and thank God for waking up in a household with clean linens and moral superiority. If you're a servant, you whisper thanks for surviving the night without being accused of theft or impertinence. If you're upper class, you thank him for digestion and the recent decline in typhoid among your social circle. Church attendance isn't optional. It's expected. Sundays are for God, not gardening, and certainly not for gossip. Though, ironically, they become the most efficient day for both. Your neighbours see who's late, who's fidgeting, who's pretending to read the hymnal while counting the seconds until roast beef. Religion defines your reputation. You don't just go to church, you go to the right church. Are you Anglican, Methodist, Catholic? God help you if you're Catholic in certain neighbourhoods, and if you're Irish and Catholic, that's 2 strikes already. Baptists are viewed as passionate, Quakers, peculiar, and Unitarians, well, best not to mention them at all. And inside these churches, sermons don't soothe, they warn. You're told of hellfire, of judgment, of eternal suffering for the sin of pride, gluttony, or failing to remove your hat during grace. Children are reminded that disobedience leads to damnation. Women are reminded that modesty is holiness. Men are reminded that wealth is a gift from God, and therefore any effort to share it is suspiciously radical. The Bible is not just a book, it is law. It's quoted at the dinner table. It's embroidered on pillows. It's whispered over babies and recited at funerals like a final exam in guilt. You are expected to live by its teachings, even if you don't understand them, especially if you don't understand them. But religion is only half the story. The other half? Superstition. Because while Victorians like to think of themselves as rational, enlightened people builders of empires, readers of Darwin, masters of steam and steel, they were also deeply, delightfully irrational. There are rules you must follow, not just for politeness, but for luck. Never cross your knives on the dinner table, it invites discord. Never spill salt without tossing a pinch over your left shoulder. That's where the devil waits, apparently. Never place bread upside down. Never serve an uneven number of guests. And for heaven's sake, never clink your glass with a toast that isn't followed by eye contact. That one's just good manners, but also bad luck. Mirrors are dangerous. They trap souls. If someone dies in the house, cover all the mirrors immediately, or risk their spirit lingering, watching, judging, possibly stealing your hairstyle. If a clock stops at the moment of death, leave it. If a bird flies into the house, someone will die. If you drop a fork, company is coming. If you drop a knife, it's bad company. If it lands pointing toward the host, prepare for drama. Superstition doesn't stop at the table. It follows you through every domestic ritual. Cutting your nails on a Friday, bad luck. Washing clothes on New Year's Day, someone in the house will die before the year is out. Whistling indoors invites poverty. Leaving a rocking chair rocking when no one's in it, that's a seat for ghosts. Do not disturb them. And then there are the omens. The things Victorians don't quite believe, but never fully dismiss. Dreamed of a white horse, an engagement is near. Saw a magpie alone, salute it immediately, or misfortune will follow. Heard church bells at the wrong hour, start praying. And what about the dining room? The very center of our tale? It's full of symbolic landmines. Do not pass the salt hand to hand, always place it on the table. Never serve 13 at a table, even if you must bring in a dummy guest. Never begin eating before the host. Never leave your spoon in the bowl. Never toast with water that's toasting to death. And if you spill wine, dab it immediately. Wine stains are for scandal, not upholstery. These weren't just quirks. They were signs of class, of belief, of knowing your place in the grand, trembling order of the universe. And if that universe occasionally sent a black cat across your path, or a priest to your doorstep, well, better to observe the signs than question them. Even the architecture reflects this blend of sacred and strange. Why are Victorian houses filled with little nooks and alcoves? Because straight lines invite bad energy. Why are windows covered in lace? To keep evil from peering in. Why so many doors that lead nowhere? Because sometimes the dead need a way to leave. You might not speak of these things at the dinner table, but you feel them in the creak of the floorboards, in the way candlelight flickers just a second too long, in the cold corner of the hallway that never quite warm. Religion is the map. Superstition is the warning signs scrawled in the margins. Together, they define the space where you eat, breathe, and try desperately not to drop your spoon and invite the attention of God and aunts alike. Because if you think etiquette was just about manners, think again. It was about control. Over sin, over chaos, over the deep, rattling fear that beneath all this lace and silver, we are still fragile, still human, still afraid of what happens when no one's watching. And speaking of watching, it's nearly time for the evening meal. Not dinner, not yet. Something simpler, something lighter, but still governed by rules. It's late afternoon now, the sun folding itself behind a haze of coal smoke and ambition. You've survived the trials of breakfast, endured the quiet terror of lunch, performed your religious duties, and resisted the urge to ask too many questions, which, in the Victorian world, is often considered more offensive than theft. Now comes the softest lie of all. Leisure. Because while you may imagine Victorians spending their evenings sipping tea and laughing gently over a piano, the truth is far more complicated and full of rules. Let's begin with the afternoon meal. Depending on your class, this could be tea, high tea, or dinner, or perhaps all three, confusingly spaced throughout the day like polite landmines. If you are upper class, you will not be eating dinner at 5. That would be horrifying. No, you are having afternoon tea, a light meal intended to prevent fainting before the actual dinner, which happens scandalously late. Afternoon tea is a ritual. The table is set lace cloth, fine china, tiered trays. The sandwiches are crustless and whisper thin. Cucumber, watercress, maybe egg and cress if you're feeling wild. Then scones always warm, always served with clotted cream and jam. But don't you dare put the cream on first. or the jam. Which one goes first is a deep cultural divide, and choosing the wrong order can lose you a marriage proposal. The tea itself must be hot, not merely warm. It must be steeped properly in a pre-warmed pot. You may not pour your own unless you are alone, in disgrace, or Queen Victoria herself. Sugar is added with tiny tongs. Milk always after the tea, unless you're a country bumpkin or French. If you're working class, you are not having afternoon tea. You're having high tea, which is not fancier tea. That's a common mistake. High tea is served at the high table in the early evening, and it's a proper meal. Bread, cheese, cold meats, maybe some pickles. Hot tea, but in thick mugs. None of your delicate porcelain nonsense. This is food designed to refuel, not to impress. For many, it's the only full meal of the day. But let's assume you're among the polite classes, where eating is performance and indigestion is rebranded as modesty. You dress for dinner, even if no one sees you, even if your ankles ache and your corset has left you winded. You change gowns, you freshen up, you make sure your gloves are clean. Men switch into black coats, freshly brushed. Hair is slicked, cravats adjusted. You are not just attending a meal, you are auditioning for your continued relevance. Dinner begins late 7:30, 8, even 9. By now you're starving, of course. But remember, you must not look eager. Hunger is common. You are not. The dining room is lit by gaslight or candles. The table is enormous. The cutlery is laid out like an obstacle course. You count your forks. You note the strange half-moon knife beside the fish plate and wonder which one is the oyster fork. It doesn't matter. Just copy your neighbor. The courses arrive in waves 6, 7, sometimes more. Soup, fish. Remove the fish knife once done. Meat, game, vegetables, cheese, dessert, fruit, coffee, all in order, all with different forks. The food is elaborate, jellied, molded, boiled in a calf's head, or roasted until it resembles a hat. Everything is covered in aspic, the culinary equivalent of saying, "I don't trust flavor." There are pies filled with larks, puddings dense enough to stop a bullet, and roasts that take hours to carve because no one wants to appear impatient. Conversation is required. Small talk only. Nothing controversial. Nothing too loud. Speak only to the person on your right for the first few courses, then your left. That's the rule. And if you run out of things to say, compliment the table setting. The host rises to offer a toast, usually to the Queen, to the ladies, to an absent guest, or to something no one quite hears but everyone nods to. You raise your glass. You sip. Never drain. Wine is served in intervals, claret, sherry, port, but never get drunk. That is for sailors and artists. After dinner, the ladies retire. Not because they're tired, but because society requires separation. The women glide into the drawing room to discuss embroidery, marriage, and what an absolute disaster the dessert course was. The men remain, drink port, and pretend to debate politics while mostly discussing trousers and how dreadful the French are. Later, the genders reunite for entertainment. And this is where the real test begins. Victorian entertainment is not optional. You do not sit in a corner and check your telegrams. There is no television. There is no escape. You will participate, and you will smile. A piano is played, badly. A cousin performs a dramatic reading of Byron. Someone sings soprano, always, and everyone claps politely, even if a dog howls in protest. Games may follow. Parlor games. Charades, but formal. 20 questions, but with rules. Cards are played in stiff silence. Whist, if you're refined. Snap, if you're rebellious. Children are sometimes permitted to join, if they can behave, which means being seen, not heard, and only speaking in French if addressed. If the evening stretches on, there may be dancing, but only with approval. Touch is monitored. Steps are memorized. A quadrille gone wrong can ruin a courtship. Waltzing, while fashionable, is still scandalous in some circles, too close, too modern, too rhythmic. In less formal homes, the entertainment is simpler. A riddle, a story, an old folk song sung off-key beside the fire, a book read aloud, or just silence, filled with the pop of coal and the slow tick of a mantel clock. And if you're very poor, the entertainment is even simpler. Sitting, resting, telling stories, hoping the bread holds out until payday. But even at the bottom of the social ladder, there are rules. Don't slouch. Don't curse in front of elders. Don't speak with your mouth full, even if it's just crumbs. And whatever you do, never eat the last piece without offering it first. That's not just rude, that's greedy. And greed is the vice of the undeserving. Eventually, the evening ends. Guests are helped into their coats. Servants stand waiting with oil lamps. The air smells of wax, roast goose, and strained conversation. Someone compliments the hostess on her choice of centerpiece. Another whispers that the wine was a bit ambitious for a Thursday, but no one says the truth out loud, that everyone is exhausted, slightly hungry still, and wondering how soon they can escape back into their dressing gowns and collapse without witnesses. Because even in leisure, Victorians perform, and the worst performance is failing to pretend that you enjoyed it. Now, it's nearly bedtime, and you'd think you've earned some peace. But before rest comes a final reminder of your own fragility. Next, sickness, suffering, and the ever-present shadow of death. It's nighttime now, or close to it. The gas lamps hiss gently in their brackets, flickering with a soft, pale light that never quite reaches the corners of the room. The coals in the fireplace glow a dull, comforting red. The air is heavy with lavender, polish, and unease. You've eaten, you've smiled, you've complimented the roast duck, as if your life depended on it, and in the Victorian era, in a way, it just might. Because, as much as the Victorians loved rules, routines, and the ritualized torment of spoon hierarchy, there was something else always present, always whispering just beneath the surface. Death. And it's not a dramatic, candle-lit, romanticized death, not yet. It's the quiet, ever-lurking kind. The kind that sniffs at every doorway, waits by every cradle, and coughs softly into every silk handkerchief. Because in the 19th century, illness is everywhere, and no one really knows what to do about it. You might wake tomorrow with a sore throat, innocent enough. But in Victorian England, that could mean diphtheria, scarlet fever, or tuberculosis. Your only warning might be a sudden pallor, a fever, or, more ominously, a persistent cough. And the moment you cough, people look at you differently, not with concern, with calculation. Because illness isn't just dangerous, it's inconvenient. It disrupts the household schedule, it endangers reputations, and worst of all, it implies weakness. Doctors do exist, of course. Men in black coats with solemn expressions and silver-tipped canes. But you don't call a doctor lightly. For one thing, it's expensive. For another, they might make things worse. Let's say you have a fever. The doctor arrives, sniffs once, and nods. He prescribes bleeding, or leeches, or a thick syrup containing opium and brandy, and something labelled simply as calming dust. He might apply a mustard plaster, a burning poultice meant to draw the illness out through your chest. Or he might just shake his head, offer you a copy of Pilgrim's Progress, and suggest preparing your will. If you're a child, it's even worse. Children die all the time in this world. Of croup, of whooping cough, of teething complications, of poor sanitation, bad milk, and the sin of being born poor. There are entire graveyards filled with tiny headstones, rows and rows of sorrow stamped into marble. Every family has lost someone. Every mother lives in a constant state of anxiety. Every nursery is painted with hope and scrubbed with desperation. And yet, medicine marches on, if very slowly, and usually in the wrong direction. Let's talk about some of the common treatments. Laudanum, a tincture of opium, alcohol, and Victorian optimism. Sold over the counter. Given to babies, praised by poets. It eases pain, soothes the nerves, and casually introduces a lifelong addiction if you survive long enough. Chlorodyne, a syrup of morphine, cannabis, chloroform, and treacle, used for everything from coughs to heartbreak. Probably delicious, definitely fatal in high doses. Castor oil administered to anyone suffering from constipation, headaches, spiritual malaise, or the vague sense that something is off. Tastes like punishment, causes distress, prescribed by the gallon. And let's not forget arsenic. Yes, that arsenic. Mixed into cosmetics, added to tonics, promised to brighten the eyes and sharpen the mind. It also brightens your liver on the way out. If you're sick and wealthy, you get a doctor. If you're sick and poor, you get a workhouse infirmary, a place where hygiene goes to die and hope checks out by lunchtime. And even if you live in a good house with clean water and lace curtains, you are not safe. Because there's no knowledge of germs, no antibiotics, no understanding of hygiene beyond the aesthetic. Your fancy marble sink might be washed twice a day, but the water's drawn from a pipe that runs next to a sewer. Your doctor may wear gloves, but only because they're fashionable. Surgical instruments? Boiled if you're lucky, wiped on a sleeve if you're not. So when someone falls ill, the entire household adjusts. Curtains are drawn, clocks are stopped, mirrors are covered, a basin is placed by the bed, a bell is hung from the headboard, so the patient can ring for help, assuming they're strong enough to lift a hand. Friends bring broth, the priest brings last rites, the family whispers in the hallways and cries behind closed doors. And if the worst happens, the room becomes a shrine. You lay in state. You are photographed, yes, photographed in your coffin, with flowers tucked into your hands and siblings posed beside you, frozen in black lace and forced smiles. Because mourning is not just a private emotion. It is a performance. You wear black. You send out cards edged in ebony. You cover the door knocker in crepe. If you are a widow, you wear deep mourning for a year. No color, no jewelry, no joy. Just layers of scratchy black bombazine and the vague hope that you'll stop weeping before your gloves wear out. Even the dining table is not safe from death. When someone dies, their place setting is removed, not just physically, but symbolically. For months afterward, that seat may remain empty. If it's a servant, their absence is never discussed. If it's a child, the high chair is quietly moved to the attic. And sometimes, even if no one has died recently, the presence of death is still invited to dinner. In the form of mourning customs, you are expected to know which foods are appropriate to serve during mourning. No rich sauces, no shellfish, certainly no game. The food must be solemn broths, cold meats, soft puddings, as if the body can only be comforted by what the soul cannot digest. So much effort to maintain the illusion that everything is under control, but underneath the etiquette, underneath the starch and the silverware, and the strict rules of who may pass the salt to whom is fear. Fear of illness, fear of death, fear of being remembered for the wrong thing. And so the rules tighten, the table settings multiply, the prayers lengthen, the superstitions grow stronger. Because if death is inevitable, at least manners can be controlled. The body may fail, the lungs may fill, the child may cough once and never again, but the tablecloth will remain clean, the napkins will be folded just so, and when the toast is made, glasses will be raised in silence. Now the fire is low, the medicine has been given, the windows are closed, and the doctor has left promising to return, but making no promises about survival. Sleep, if it comes, will be shallow, dreams interrupted by coughing, footsteps, and the creak of floorboards as someone paces in the hallway, wringing their hands behind a lace curtain, because in the Victorian world, no one truly sleeps easy. But tomorrow is another day, and in that day, as always, there are roles to be played, and nothing plays harder than family morning again, or something like it. The sun filters through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the worn carpet. There's a knock at the door, soft, apologetic, and entirely unnecessary, because you're already awake. You've been awake. That's the thing about family life in the Victorian world. It doesn't begin when you rise. It waits for no one. It hovers. It breathes beside you in the cradle, in the nursery, in the quiet ticking of the clock that marks out your obligations in half-hour increments. This is the domestic heart of the Victorian world. Not the parlour, not the dinner table, not even the church pew. It is the family, in all its rigid glory. A structure so carefully designed that no one dares question it, even as it quietly suffocates everyone inside. Let's start with women. A Victorian woman is many things, but above all, she is dutiful. Her worth is measured in silence, sacrifice, and the ability to serve roast beef with a smile after 7 hours of unpaid management. If you are a woman of the upper or middle class, your role is crystal clear. You are the angel of the house, a phrase that sounds charming until you realize it means you're expected to be invisible, obedient, and morally radiant at all times. You rise early, but not too early. You must look rested, even if the baby cried all night. You must look modest, even if your corset threatens to rearrange your ribs. You must smile, always, and nod at your husband as if his opinion on crumpets were divine revelation. You don't work not for money, anyway. That would be vulgar, but you labor endlessly. You oversee the household, you manage the servants, you instruct the children, gently but firmly, in the art of being well-behaved, well-dressed, and slightly terrified of you. And if you're unmarried, well, that's its own prison. The unmarried Victorian woman, the spinster, the maiden aunt, the companion, is viewed with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Too old for marriage, too young for death. She floats around the edges of domestic life, like a ghost who organizes embroidery floss and never speaks above a whisper. Your only acceptable escape route? Marriage, but not for love. Love is an accident, or worse, a complication. Marriage is a transaction. You bring a dowry: cash, land, linens, your reputation, and in exchange a man promises to provide. He becomes your protector, your owner, in all but legal name. And if you are lower class, the expectations remain, but without the lace. You rise before dawn. You work until your fingers split. You care for your children, your siblings, your employer's children, and sometimes your employer's employer. And you do it all in the same apron. You are nurse, cook, laundress, disciplinarian, and if you're lucky, briefly human on Sundays. And through it all, you are expected to remain pure, chaste, dignified, even when dignity is a luxury you can't afford. Now, let's talk about children. In the Victorian world, children are not precious. They are potential. If you're rich, you are raised like a houseplant, admired from afar, watered occasionally, and expected to grow in the correct direction without disturbing the furniture. You are handed to a nursemaid at birth, then a governess, You see your parents once a day, maybe, during the formal moment called Children's Hour, in which you are paraded like a prize spaniel and expected to curtsy with precision. Affection is minimal. Kisses are discouraged. Coddling is a sin. You are not your parents' joy, you are their future responsibility. An heir, a debutante, a piece on the chessboard of family strategy. You are educated in French, piano, posture, scripture, and silence. You learn to walk quietly, speak when spoken to, and never ask questions about where your brother went when he got sent down from Eton. And if you are poor, your childhood ends at 5. Maybe earlier. You go to work, in the mill, in the mine, in a matchstick factory where the air itself poisons you. You are paid a few pence a week. Your clothes are patched. Your shoes are mismatched. Your fingers are too small to hold a pen, but perfect for cleaning gears that could kill you. You don't play. You don't rest. You survive if you're lucky. And yet, even in the poorest homes, family means something. It's not romantic, not soft, but it's real. Parents love their children with a fierceness that the etiquette books ignore. Siblings care for one another like co-conspirators in a system designed to forget them. And then there's father, the patriarch, the head of the house, the figure at the top of the dinner table and the center of every family portrait, even the ones taken after he's dead. A Victorian father is not affectionate. That's not his role. His love is implied a quiet nod, a raised eyebrow, a sudden decision to pay for a new winter coat. He is stern, he is correct, he is frequently absent. He works, he provides, he corrects. And occasionally, if you've done something especially obedient, he allows himself a moment of approval. Not spoken, of course, but implied in the way he hands you a coin or doesn't correct your Latin pronunciation. But make no mistake, he is in charge. If you're a wife, you defer. If you're a child, you obey. If you're a servant, you disappear entirely when he enters the room. Because Victorian families are not built on affection. They are built on structure, on rituals, on roles, on everyone knowing exactly what they're supposed to be and pretending it's what they want. Even at the dinner table, especially at the dinner table, the seating is arranged by rank: the host at one end, the guests in order of importance, children silent, servants unseen. Women don't speak too much. Men don't raise their voices. Everyone eats slowly, with the right fork, and thanks the host for a meal they barely touched. And underneath it all, a truth no one dares speak, that everyone is tired. The mother, from managing the illusion. The father, from maintaining control. The children, from trying to be perfect. The servants, from carrying the entire show. But no one says this. No one breaks the spell. Because family, in Victorian England, is sacred not for the joy it brings, but for the order it enforces. The house is a machine, the family is the fuel, and you are one cog in a system designed to never stop turning even when someone is missing, even when no one's happy, even when all the silver is polished and still no one can quite breathe. But now it's growing late. The shadows stretch long across the hallways, and just outside the window, someone's raising their voice. Not a family squabble, something more, because next comes the world beyond the dining room conflict, injustice, and the social cracks no etiquette book can cover. The sun is beginning its descent behind chimneys and factory smoke, casting everything in a grim golden haze. In a more romantic version of history, this is the time for calm, an hour of tea, reading, and polite sighing beside the fire. But in the real Victorian world, afternoon doesn't promise peace. It promises friction. Social conflict, like everything else in this era, is dressed in petticoats and waistcoats, but beneath the fabric lies something far more volatile: class resentment, gender frustration, political unrest, and the deep, gnawing awareness that the world is changing faster than the rules can adapt. You feel it in the drawing room, in the market stalls, in the street corners where orphans hawk newspapers and suffragists hand out pamphlets. It crackles in the air just below the sound of carriage wheels and church bells. Society is strained, and someone is always about to snap. Let's begin at home. You've spent the day performing your role. Maybe you've set the table 5 times. Maybe you've scrubbed the same step until the skin peeled from your knuckles. Maybe you've played hostess to a guest who subtly insulted your daughter's piano technique. Or maybe you've said nothing at all, but your silence itself is considered a moral failing. The longer the day stretches, the more rules tighten. Politeness becomes brittle. Smiles harden into masks. And small moments, a servant forgetting to curtsy, a child speaking out of turn, a wife daring to question her husband's choice of wine becomes sparks. Because beneath all this lace and silver and protocol, people are furious. Women, for example, are quietly seething. They smile through corsets. They nod through condescension. They pretend that being denied education, property rights, and legal autonomy is simply the way things are. But behind closed doors or inside parlors during women-only teas, they plot. They write essays. They form clubs. They raise eyebrows and questions. What if a woman could vote? What if a woman could own her own home? What if a woman didn't need a husband to be respectable? These are dangerous ideas, revolutionary. And revolutions, even gentle ones, tend to frighten people in waistcoats. Meanwhile, in the servants' quarters, resentment boils just as hot, but with less opportunity for escape. Imagine working from before dawn until after dusk, only to be reprimanded for dust on a lamp no one lit. Imagine being told to eat in the kitchen, sleep in the attic, and never speak unless spoken to, while knowing the entire household would collapse without you. You fetch the coal, you prepare the meals, you press the shirts, arrange the flowers, feed the dog, and somehow still find yourself blamed for the master's missing cufflinks. And what's worse, you're not supposed to feel anything about it. Servants must be cheerful, grateful, invisible, but they're not. Not really. There are murmurs in the pantry, glances exchanged on back staircases, letters passed between maids, dreams tiny and fragile, folded and hidden inside apron pockets. Then there are the working classes, the backbone of the empire. Though no one calls them that, they endure long hours in factories, suffocating in lint and steam. They live in tenements, sleep 4 to a bed, and eat food that would make the Queen's Spaniel gag. They're told they're lazy, that poverty is a moral failure, not a systemic reality, that their children die young because of their own poor choices, not because the milk is tainted and the water runs thick with disease. And so they march, they gather in squares and sing labor songs, they form unions, they demand fair wages, shorter hours, and the radical idea that maybe life shouldn't be defined entirely by survival. They are met with suspicion and batons, because for the Victorian upper crust, nothing is more frightening than the idea of the poor realizing they are many, and the rich are few. But even among the wealthy, conflict brews. There are rules, yes, but also a million ways to break them, and no clear manual on what happens next. If you are a woman, for example, and you host a dinner party and accidentally place the wrong guest next to the bishop, scandal. If your husband is seen visiting a particular club too frequently, rumors. If your daughter laughs too loudly, too often, or at the wrong type of joke, social death. The whole system is designed to crack because it's held together by anxiety and hypocrisy. And that's not even touching race, empire, or colonial guilt. Because while the Victorian home is all polished wood and shining cutlery, the source of that wealth is far murkier. sugar from plantations, tea from colonized India, cotton picked by people who never saw compensation, let alone justice. No one speaks of it at dinner, but it hangs in the air, in the imported spices, in the exotic decor, in the casual comments made by uncles who've served abroad and come back with chests full of medals and souls full of compromise. Even among the aristocracy, the cracks show. Old money looks down on new. Industrialists try to buy respect with grand houses and better wine. Nobles marry Americans for cash. Daughters are married off to ancient titles like business deals with better upholstery. And then there's law and punishment, the final hammer of order. You may think you're safe in a drawing room, but the law creeps in everywhere. Steal a loaf of bread, transported to Australia, speak at a labour meeting, watched by the police, have a child out of wedlock, shunned for life, be accused, just accused of impropriety, ruined, irreparably. Victorian society doesn't just punish criminals, it punishes non-compliance, deviance, even curiosity. And those punishments are rarely legal. They are social. They happen in whispers, in missed invitations, in glances across dinner tables that say more than any judge ever could. You don't go to jail. You simply stop being invited, which, in this world, is worse. But for now, the shadows grow longer. The cook is preparing supper. The maids have lit the hallway lamps. The streets begin to quiet, but not with peace. With tension, 1,000 arguments left unsaid, 1,000,000 tiny rebellions being folded into napkins and tucked behind polite smiles. Because no matter what happened this afternoon, no matter who insulted whom, who cried in the scullery, who got caught kissing behind the conservatory, everyone will be at the table tonight. And they will eat. And they will pretend, because the performance must go on, even in darkness. And speaking of darkness, night is coming. And night in the Victorian world is never simple. Nightfall in the Victorian world doesn't arrive gently. It creeps, one flickering gaslight at a time, one shadow stretched long across the cobblestone. The golden haze of afternoon fades into something colder, not quite silent, but hesitant, as though the world itself is holding its breath. You're back inside now. Behind lace curtains and heavy velvet drapes, the doors are bolted, the windows latched. The house is sealed, because night is not to be trusted, even in the most respectable homes, even where the fires are tended, and the soup is still warm, and the silver polished to a mirror shine. The dark hours carry a sense of unease. There is no electricity, only gaslight or candles, and both cast shadows that dance in ways the human eye doesn't always appreciate. The corners of the room take on shape. The mirror seems deeper than it was in the morning. Every creak in the floorboards might be the house, or something older, still living inside it. Even bedtime is dictated by class. If you're wealthy, you'll be helped into a long cotton nightgown and perhaps a woolen wrapper. A maid will brush your hair, bring you a hot brick for your feet, and leave a pitcher of cold water on the washstand in case you wake and need to cleanse yourself, spiritually or otherwise. If you're a child, a nurse tucks you in. She recites a psalm or sings something from memory, low, soft, and vaguely unsettling. It always ends the same way. And if I die before I wake, you finish the prayer silently. Everyone does. It's not metaphorical, because in Victorian homes, people do die in their sleep, often in the night. Fevers rise, coughs deepen, babies stop breathing, chimneys catch fire, candles fall, rats bite, neighbours break in. The dark is full of potential. The respectable kind of death, the one that comes with illness and a doctor, and last words that's daytime's domain. At night, death is quick, unannounced, and often anonymous. A woman smothered by her own corset in a fever dream. A servant tripping on stairs too steep and too dark. A child wandering half asleep toward the fire. A burglar mistaken for a shadow, or a shadow mistaken for something real. Even the way you sleep is dangerous. Beds are tall, needlessly so. You must climb up to them, fall off, and you might break something you can't afford to treat. Mattresses are lumpy, stuffed with horsehair or straw. Sheets are bleached stiff. There are no electric blankets, just layers of wool that itch and trap cold more efficiently than warmth. You lie flat, eyes open, listening to the pipes, to the wind, to the faraway sound of a carriage echoing down cobbled streets. And if you're a servant, you don't sleep in a bed, you curl on a cot, in the attic or the cellar, with rats whispering in the walls and a bell pull above your head that could summon you at any hour. You're not asleep, you're waiting. Night is when fears become louder. Not just fear of death, but fear of the unknown. What if the baby doesn't cry tonight? What if the master comes home angry? What if the mistress wakes screaming again? What if someone saw you steal that second bread roll and is waiting to confront you publicly with the full force of Victorian righteousness? And then there are the superstitions. They thrive at night. Mirrors are covered not just during morning, but often, just in case. Reflections are dangerous things in the dark. They might show you more than yourself. Clocks are stopped after a death, yes, but some stop themselves, unnervingly. At the exact hour a family member passes miles away. Doors are locked tight, but some houses hang sprigs of dried herbs near the thresholds, rosemary, lavender, sometimes rowan to keep spirits at bay. You don't open windows at night, not just because of the cold, but because of what might come in. Air is not seen as cleansing. It's contaminated with miasma, with disease, with whispers. If someone in the neighborhood has died recently, you might hear weeping in the street, a death watch, a silent vigil, or maybe just a drunk man arguing with ghosts only he can see. And in cities, especially London, the night is worse. Fog crawls in like a living thing. Carriages vanish into it. Gaslight turns it yellow, oily, thick enough to taste. This is the hour of pickpockets, of prostitutes in shawls too thin, of constables who patrol in pairs and still hesitate at certain corners. And if you're in the East End, well, best not to be. Men have vanished there. Women have been found. No one speaks the name Jack out loud after dark. Even in the countryside, far from soot and scandal, night brings its own fears. Wolves may be gone, but the howling isn't. And every old manor has a locked room, a sealed cupboard, a set of stairs that no one climbs after sundown. And then there's fire, the greatest nighttime fear in every Victorian home. A candle left burning, a curtain drawn too close, a spark from the hearth. The entire house can go up in minutes. There are no alarms, no sprinklers, only buckets, yells, and prayers. You might go to bed and wake in smoke, or not wake at all. That's why the fire screen is always placed, the candles always snuffed, and the matches locked away. You must do everything right before sleep, not out of superstition, but because the price of carelessness is catastrophic. And if you're lucky, if you've done all the right things, checked all the latches, whispered all the prayers, you may fall asleep. But even then, your sleep will not be peaceful, because in your dreams, the rules still apply. Your soup must be sipped quietly. Your shoes must not squeak. You must not drop your fork even in the dream, because someone is always watching. The ancestors in the portraits, the servants you underpaid, the doctor who said you'd be fine, the baby who didn't cry. The fear never leaves. It simply wears slippers after dark. But now, somewhere far away, a clock chimes softly. You are still breathing. The house has not burned. The child has not cried. The mirror has shown only your own pale, uncertain reflection. You close your eyes. You hope for morning. You hope the candles are burned down now. The air is still. The fireplace nothing more than a faint red glow. Somewhere far off, the city exhales one last cart rolling past, one last cough, one last church bell reluctantly calling midnight. The house sighs in its sleep. And you're still here, still lying on that uncomfortable mattress, wrapped in heavy linen sheets and the weight of a world that never quite allowed rest. You've survived a full day in the Victorian era, a world of rules and rituals, order and oppression, starch and structure, a world that told you who to be before you could even decide what you wanted, where even a dinner party wasn't really about food, but about judgment. Let's remember where we started. You woke up under a canopy of velvet and dust, cold floors, stiff blankets, water that bit your skin, a room that looked elegant and smelled faintly of coal and mildew. And from that moment on, you were performing. You dressed not for comfort, but for approval. Corsets pulled tight, collars buttoned high, shoes shined to prove you understood your place in the great unspoken order of things. You ate breakfast carefully, chewing not just food but manners. Toast that wasn't hot, tea that had its own etiquette manual, conversations limited to the weather, the Queen's health, and the slow tragedy of someone using the jam spoon incorrectly. You worked in mind, in body, or in effort not to show strain, whether you ran a household, polished silver, or simply endured the pressure of being watched. Every moment was labor. You walked through a world that judged everything: how you sat, how you coughed, how loudly you breathed. And when you spoke, it wasn't to express but to maintain a script. You survived a dinner that was part theatre, part interrogation. Forks lined up like soldiers, soup lukewarm and silences longer than most marriages. You toasted people you didn't like and nodded at stories you'd heard a dozen times before, each word chosen as carefully as an heirloom. You sat through entertainment that was sometimes art, sometimes agony, off-key songs, dramatic readings, games with rules older than the country they were played in, and still you smiled, because that's what Victorians did, even when they were terrified of death, even when they didn't believe in what they were saying, even when the candles flickered and they knew, deep down, that the entire structure of their society was as fragile as the china they set out for tea. It wasn't just about manners. It was about control. Control over self, control over others, control over the messy human things that couldn't be allowed to show hunger, emotion, mortality. And now, finally, it's over. The last fork has been polished. The last bell has been silenced. The ghosts in the wallpaper have settled down for the night. And you're left in the dark, in a room that never quite feels empty. The sounds are smaller now, the soft creak of the walls cooling, the distant bark of a dog who doesn't understand status, maybe a draft slipping in under the door, reminding you that no matter how many layers of etiquette you wear, the world always finds a way in. But you're warm, or warm enough, and you know deep in your tired limbs that you'll never have to wake up in this world again. You won't have to remember which spoon to use. You won't have to wait to be addressed. You won't have to lace your torso into a question mark to fit someone else's ideal. You can just rest. Because this world, though fascinating, though eerily beautiful in its obsession with order, was never designed for comfort. It was designed for performance, for survival, for status and structure, and the endless, exhausting pursuit of being seen the right way. But here, now in your bed, in your world, You don't have to perform. You can breathe. You can exhale. You can stretch your toes without worrying about scuffing a table leg. You don't need to worry about your posture. You don't need to dress for the judgment of others. You don't need to remember if you butter the bread one bite at a time. You can just drift away from soup spoons, away from coal smoke, away from the delicate, ridiculous anxiety of remembering which fork is for fish. Let your shoulders drop. Let the rules fade. Let the silverware disappear into the shadows of memory. Because tonight, you've walked through a world that tried to make every moment a test, and you passed. Not with grace, necessarily. Not with elegance, but with survival. And survival is the only etiquette that really matters. So tonight, as your breathing slows and your thoughts grow softer, remember, you don't live in that world. You don't have to wake up tomorrow and ask for jam with the wrong spoon. You don't have to lace a corset. You don't have to wait to be spoken to. You're free, so close your eyes. Let the gas lights flicker out. Let the cold night belong to someone else. Because you're safe, you're modern, you're home, and most importantly, you don't have to wake up in Victorian England. Sleep well.